The helicopter's rotors cut through the Afghan dawn like a blade through silk. Inside, 12 Navy SEALs sat in practiced silence, their faces masks of concentration beneath night vision goggles pushed up on their helmets. The briefing had been simple: extract a high-value target from a compound in the Korangal Valley. Standard insertion. Standard exfil. Nothing they hadn't done 100 times before. But then the pilot's voice crackled through their headsets, and something in its tone made Lieutenant Commander Marcus Reeves lean forward. The voice was female, calm, almost bored. Talon 26, inbound to LZ Alpha. Winds from the northwest at 15 knots. Expect dust-off in 40 seconds. Several of the operators exchanged glances. One of them, a stocky Texan they called Hammer, keyed his mic. Confirm pilot designation. There was a pause, just a heartbeat, before the response came. Reaper, your pilot is Reaper. The name meant nothing to them then. The Black Hawk descended through layers of morning mist that clung to the valley walls like smoke. From the cockpit, Captain Vesper, Reaper Cahill watched the terrain rise to meet her with the detached precision of someone who had logged over 2,000 combat hours. Her hands moved across the controls with an economy of motion that came from muscle memory so deep it lived in her bones. Beside her, her co-pilot, a fresh-faced warrant officer named Dixon, gripped his collective a little too tight. She didn't comment. Everyone was nervous their first week in country. The landing zone materialized through the haze, a flat stretch of rocky ground surrounded by compounds and terraced fields. She brought the aircraft down without a whisper of deviation from her approach angle, the wheels kissing earth so gently that Hammer, who was already standing and ready to dismount, actually stumbled slightly. More glances among the team. Good flying was good flying, regardless of who was at the stick. They poured out into the gray dawn, weapons up, moving like shadows toward their objective. Reaper watched them disappear through her night vision display, then settled back to wait. Dixon was studying the ridgeline with obvious anxiety. "You ever get used to it?" he asked. "Sitting here while they're out there?" She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes were scanning the instruments, the terrain, the sky, always the sky. "You get used to knowing your job," she finally said. "Their job is out there. Ours is right here." Her hand rested on the collective, ready. Behind them in the cargo bay, her medical pack sat strapped to the bulkhead. The one with the caduceus patch she'd earned in another life, before she'd become a pilot, when she'd carried different equipment and answered to different calls. Before Korangal. Before everything changed. Before she became Reaper. The compound assault should have taken 12 minutes. At minute 14, Reeves' voice came through her headset, clipped and professional. "Reaper, Talon 26, be advised we've got complications. Multiple hostiles, more than intelligence indicated. We're moving to secondary exfil point. Designate LZ Bravo, grid November Delta 734592. Vesper's fingers were already moving, plotting the new coordinates on her display. LZ Bravo was higher up the valley, more exposed, surrounded by terrain that offered excellent fields of fire for anyone with half a brain and an AK-47. Copy Talon 26. LZ Bravo, I can be overhead in 4 minutes. Negative, Reaper, hold position, we'll make our way to you. She understood immediately. They didn't trust her to fly into a hot zone. To them, she was an unknown quantity, a voice without a face, a pilot without a reputation. They would hump it back to the original LZ rather than ask her to come get them under fire. Standard operating procedure when you didn't know your aviation assets. Standard procedure when those assets were untested. The fact that she was female had nothing to do with it, she told herself. Except it had everything to do with it, and they both knew it. Dixon was looking at her. "What do we do?" The sound of gunfire crackled through the radio, distant but unmistakable. Reeves again, contact left and right, taking fire from multiple positions, moving to cover. Vesper's jaw tightened imperceptibly. She thought about the hours she'd spent in Landstuhl, in Bagram, in field hospitals across 3 deployments, working trauma cases that would haunt her until the day she died. She thought about the moment she decided that saving lives from the air was better than collecting bodies on the ground. She thought about the call sign they'd given her in flight school, the one that had followed her through every assignment since, the one that was both burden and badge. Reaper, Because death follows, but she decides who it takes. Dixon, she said quietly, call in our departure to operations. Tell them we're moving to LZ Bravo. But they said, I know what they said. Her hand was already pulling pitch, the Black Hawk rising from the earth like a resurrection. Tell them Reaper is inbound. The aircraft banked hard, nose dropping as she poured on speed. The valley walls blurred past, close enough that Dixon made a small sound in his throat. She ignored him. Her mind was calculating angles, distances, threat assessments. The radio chatter was getting more urgent now. Talon 2-6 taking casualties. 1 urgent, 2 priority. We need to move. Reeves' voice was still controlled, but she could hear the tension underneath. She'd heard that tone before in tent hospitals when the morphine was running low and the wounded kept coming. The sound of someone holding it together by will alone. Reaper, Talon 2-6, what is your position? She could see the compound now, and beyond it, the small cluster of structures where Reeves and his team had taken cover. Muzzle flashes sparked from windows and rooftops like fireflies in the growing dawn. The LZ she'd plotted was a small terrace about 200 meters from their position, but it was taking fire from at least 3 directions. There was nowhere safe to land, nowhere safe except the impossible. Talon 2-6, Reaper is 1 minute out. I need you to pop smoke and trust me. There was a pause. She could imagine Reeves looking at his men, at the wounded, making calculations of his own. Reaper, that LZ is too hot. We'll find another way. There is no other way, Lieutenant Commander. Your wounded don't have time to find another way. Her voice was flat, matter-of-fact. Not pleading, not emotional, just stating tactical reality. Pop smoke, I'm coming in. Another pause, longer this time. Then, purple smoke out. Through the windscreen, she saw the violet plume rise from behind a wall. The compound was a maze of mud, brick, and narrow alleys, the kind of place where helicopters went to die, where rotor wash kicked up blinding dust and enemy fire came from every angle at once. The kind of place every pilot was trained to avoid. She didn't avoid it. She flew straight into it. The Black Hawk roared over the compound at 100 feet, taking fire from the moment she crossed the perimeter. Dixon was calling out threats, his voice climbing an octave with each new muzzle flash. She barely heard him. Her entire world had collapsed down to the controls in her hands, the aircraft's response, the geometry of the approach. There was no room for fear here, no space for doubt. Only the pure mathematics of rotor dynamics and the even purer faith that her hands knew what they were doing. The terrace materialized below, barely large enough for the helicopter's footprint, surrounded by walls and wires and 1,000 things that could kill them. She brought the Black Hawk down in a controlled descent that seemed to defy physics, the rotor tips clearing the surrounding structures by margins measured in inches. When the wheels touched down, she'd been holding her breath without realizing it. We're down. 30 seconds, then we're up whether you're on board or not. It wasn't a threat. It was just reality. Stay on the ground too long in a hot LZ and you became a monument to someone else's tactical error. The SEALs came at a run, 4 of them carrying 2 wounded. Reeves was last, moving backwards, weapon up, covering their retreat. In the cargo bay, Dixon had moved back to help load the casualties. Vesper kept her hands on the controls, feeling the weight shift as bodies piled in. A round punched through the fuselage somewhere behind her with a metallic ping. Another sparked off the armored windscreen. She ignored them, counting seconds. 20, 25. Reeves' voice, last man aboard. She was pulling pitch before he finished the sentence. The Black Hawk clawed its way back into the sky, rotors screaming, turbines howling. More rounds stitched across the tail boom. An alarm began to beep, hydraulic pressure dropping. Not catastrophic, not yet. She leveled off at 500 feet and turned toward base, hands working the controls to compensate for the damage. The aircraft was flying wrong, pulling to the left, but it was flying. That was enough. In the back, Dixon was working on the casualties, his flight medic training taking over. But after a moment, he looked up helpless. Reaper, I need help. I can't stop the bleeding. She glanced at Reeves, who had made his way to the cockpit, his face streaked with dust and cordite residue. Their eyes met for a moment. Without a word, she reached down and unbuckled her harness. You've got the aircraft, she told him. His eyes widened. I'm not rated on, you're about to be. Keep the nose level, maintain this altitude and heading. The controls are more sensitive than they feel, don't overcorrect. She was already moving past him toward the cargo bay, toward the screaming. One of the wounded was a kid, couldn't have been more than 22, with half his leg gone below the knee. The other was older, unconscious, with a chest wound that bubbled pink foam with each shallow breath. Dixon had tourniquets on both of them, but it wasn't enough. It was never enough. Vesper knelt beside the chest wound first, her hands moving with the same precision they'd used on the controls moments before. She'd done this dance too many times to count. Assessment, stabilization, prayer. The medical pack that had been strapped to the bulkhead was open now, its contents spilling across the blood-slicked deck as the helicopter bucked through mountain turbulence. She worked in silence, her world narrowing once again to just the task at hand. Needle decompression, chest seal, pressure. The man's breathing eased slightly, not much, enough. The younger SEAL was watching her with eyes wide from shock and pain. "Am I going to die?" he asked, his voice small. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw 1,000 other young men who'd asked her the same question in 1,000 other desperate moments. "Not today," she told him, and meant it. Her hands moved to his leg, checking Dixon's tourniquet, tightening it, adding another higher up. Blood was everywhere, on her flight suit, on her hands, on the deck. The familiar copper smell of it mixed with hydraulic fluid and gunpowder. The smell of combat. The smell of her former life. She'd thought she'd left this behind when she pinned on her wings. Thought she could save lives from a distance, deliver the wounded to the surgeons rather than be the surgeon. But here she was again, covered in someone else's blood, fighting death with hands and will, and expired battlefield medicine. From the cockpit she heard Reeves' voice, tight with concentration. "Reaper, I think we're losing altitude." She didn't look up from her work. "We are. That hydraulic hit is worse than I thought. Keep pulling back on the collective, gently. You're going to feel like you're overcorrecting. You're not." There was a pause. "How do you know that if you're back there?" "Because I can hear the turbines. Because I've been shot down twice and walked away from both. Because this is what I do, Lieutenant Commander." "Now fly the helicopter." The calm in her voice seemed to steady him. The aircraft stopped descending. One of the other SEALs, Hammer, was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not quite respect yet, not quite disbelief, something in between. "You're a medic?" he asked. "Was," she said, starting an IV line in the unconscious man's arm with hands that didn't shake despite the helicopter's bucking. "Combat medic, 3 deployments before I went to flight school." Why the chain? She thought about how to answer that. About the night in Helmand when she'd worked a mass casualty event for 16 straight hours, when she'd saved 8 and lost 15, when she'd finally walked out of the tent and screamed at the sky because her hands could only do so much, could only reach so far. "Because from up there," she finally said, nodding toward the cockpit, "I can get to you faster, can pull you out before you bleed out, can be the difference between wounded and dead." She finished with the IV and moved back to check the chest seal, still holding. And because flying is cleaner, usually. She allowed herself a small, grim smile. Hammer actually laughed, a short bark of sound that seemed surprised to escape. The kid with the leg wound tried to laugh too, but it came out as a cough. She put her hand on his shoulder. "Save your energy. We'll be at Bagram in 12 minutes. They've got the good painkillers there." From the cockpit, Reeves called back. "Reaper, base is asking for a situation report." "What do I tell them?" she considered. The aircraft was damaged but flying. 2 casualties stable enough to make it to base. A SEAL team extracted from what should have been a routine operation but had turned into something else entirely. And her, covered in blood, doing the job she'd thought she'd left behind. "Tell them," she said, "that Reaper is inbound with souls on board. And tell them to have trauma standing by. We're coming in fast." The rest of the flight passed in tense silence, broken only by radio chatter and the labored breathing of the wounded. She monitored them constantly, adjusting IVs, checking vitals, keeping them alive through sheer stubborn will. In the cockpit, Reeves was learning real-time what it meant to fly a damaged helicopter, and to her surprise, he was doing it competently. She called out corrections when needed, but mostly he figured it out. Fighter pilots might mock the helicopter community, Call them bus drivers and trash haulers, but there was an art to keeping a broken aircraft in the air. An art that Reeves, for all his SEAL bravado, was developing respect for with every passing minute. When Bagram finally appeared on the horizon, she talked him through the approach and landing with the patience of someone who'd been an instructor in another life. The Black Hawk touched down hard but safe, and immediately the ramp was flooded with medical personnel. She helped transfer the casualties, giving quick handoff reports to the receiving surgeons, then stepped back as they were wheeled away toward the hospital. It was only then, standing in the rotor wash as Reeves shut down the engines, that she realized how tired she was, how much adrenaline had been holding her together. Dixon appeared beside her, looking shaken but alive. "That was the craziest thing I've ever seen," he said. She looked at him, this kid who'd started his day nervous about his first combat insertion and ended it flying through a hot LZ with a pilot who'd abandoned the controls to do battlefield medicine in the back. "Welcome to the war," she told him. Behind them, the SEALs were climbing out, stretching, checking weapons. Reeves approached slowly, helmet tucked under his arm. His face was difficult to read. "Captain Cahill," he said formally. "That was some flying and some medicine." She shrugged, suddenly aware of how she must look, covered in blood and hydraulic fluid, her flight suit torn somewhere she hadn't noticed, her hands still shaking slightly now that the action was over. "Just another day, Lieutenant Commander," but he shook his head. "No, it wasn't." He extended his hand and she shook it. His grip was firm, the kind that meant something. "Where'd you get the call sign, Reaper?" She'd been asked that question 100 times. Usually she gave the simple answer, the one that satisfied curiosity without revealing anything real. But standing there in the morning light with the smell of blood still in her nostrils and the echo of rotor blades still ringing in her ears, she gave him the truth. "Korangal Valley, 3 years ago. I was a medic attached to a Marine unit. We got overrun during a night patrol, lost our corpsman in the first 30 seconds. I worked triage for 11 hours straight while the fighting went on around me, saved 19 Marines that night." She paused, looking past him at nothing. "Lost 3. The Marines started calling me Reaper because I decided who lived and who died. The name stuck. When I went to flight school, I brought it with me." Reeves was quiet for a moment, processing this. Around them, the base was coming alive with morning routines, helicopters spooling up, trucks moving, the organized chaos of a forward operating base. "And the medic bag?" he asked, nodding toward the Black Hawk where her pack was still visible in the cargo bay. "You still carry it, even though you're a pilot now?" She followed his gaze. "Always, because you never know when you'll need to remember where you came from, what you were before you became what you are." She turned back to him. "Your men are going to be fine, by the way. The kid will walk again, might have a limp, but he'll walk. The other one will need surgery, but he'll make it. They're both too stubborn to die." Hammer had joined them along with 2 other operators. They were looking at her differently now. The dismissive glances from the insertion were gone, replaced by something else, something earned. "You know," Hammer said slowly, "we might have been wrong about you, Reaper." She raised an eyebrow. "Might have been." He had the grace to look embarrassed. "Definitely we're wrong, about you being just another pilot. About," he trailed off, but she knew what he wasn't saying, "about her being female, about her being capable, about her belonging here." "Don't worry about it," she said. "Everyone underestimates their first female pilot. You're not special." That got a laugh from several of them. The tension broke like a fever. Reeves cleared his throat. "We're going to be here for another 2 weeks. Same operational tempo, same kinds of missions. I'd like to request you as our dedicated aviation asset for the remainder of the deployment, if that's possible." She considered. 2 weeks of flying SEALs into bad places and pulling them out of worse ones. 2 weeks of living on the edge between being a pilot and being a medic. 2 weeks of proving over and over that she belonged in both worlds. "I'll need to clear it with my she said. "But yeah, I'm in." They shook hands again, and this time it felt like a pact, like the beginning of something. As they dispersed to debrief and file reports, Dixon caught up with her. "Did you mean that?" "About everyone underestimating their first female pilot," she smiled, a real smile this time. "Absolutely. You get used to it. The trick is making sure they don't underestimate you twice." That night, Lying in her bunk in the female officer quarters, Vesper stared at the ceiling and thought about the path that had brought her here. The daughter of a Marine Corps master sergeant and a civilian nurse, she'd grown up on bases around the world, absorbing military culture like osmosis. When she'd enlisted at 18, it had felt inevitable. Combat medic because her mother was a nurse. Infantry support because her father was a Marine. She'd been good at it, better than good. She had the hands and the temperament, the ability to stay calm when everything was chaos, to make the right call when the wrong call meant someone died. But after 3 deployments, after hundreds of casualties worked and dozens lost, she'd felt something breaking inside her. The weight of all those decisions, all those lives in her hands, all those bodies she couldn't save. She'd needed distance, altitude. So she'd applied for flight school, the first woman in her class, enduring the hazing and the doubt and the 1,000 small cuts that came from being different. She'd graduated second in her class. Would have been first, but she'd lost points on land navigation. A cruel irony for someone who could find her way through a firefight with her eyes closed. The Army had made her a Black Hawk pilot, and she'd embraced it with the same intensity she'd brought to medicine. But she'd never stopped carrying the medic bag. Never stopped thinking of herself as a corpsman who happened to fly. Because that's what she was. That's what she'd always be. Reaper. Death's companion. Death's negotiator. The person who stood between the wounded and the void and said, "Not yet. Not on my watch." She must have fallen asleep eventually because the next thing she knew, Dixon was shaking her awake. "Reaper, we've got a mission brief in 20. Talon 26 requested us specifically." She sat up, instantly alert. "What's the op?" "Another compound, different valley, same intelligence quality, which is to say probably wrong." He grinned. "They want us wheels up in 90 minutes. She swung out of bed, already mentally running through pre-flight checks. "Tell them we'll be ready in 60. And they were. For the next 2 weeks, Vesper and Dixon flew mission after mission with Reeves and his team. Each insertion was a gamble, each extraction a negotiation with death. They took fire. They took damage. Twice more she had to leave the controls to work on casualties in the back. Once she had to talk Reeves through landing the helicopter while she defibrillated a SEAL whose heart had stopped from blood loss. They got him back. They always got them back. The team stopped questioning her judgments. Stopped second-guessing her decisions. When she said she could make an approach, they believed her. When she said the LZ was too hot, they found another one. A bond was forming, the kind that only forms in combat, built on trust and blood and shared near-death experiences. On their 12th mission, everything went wrong. The insertion was clean, but the target building was a trap. The SEALs walked into a complex ambush with enemy fighters in positions that suggested they'd been expecting exactly this assault at exactly this time. Within 60 seconds of initial contact, half the team was wounded and they were pinned down under fire so heavy that extraction seemed impossible. Reeves' voice on the radio was strained. "Reaper, we are in heavy contact. Multiple wounded. We need immediate exfil, but there's no LZ. Repeat, no viable landing zone. They've got us boxed in." She was already airborne, racing toward their position. Through the windscreen she could see the compound, a maze of buildings with enemy positions on every rooftop. No terraces, no clearings, no place to land. Just walls and wires and certain death for any helicopter that tried. "Talon 26, I see your smoke. Give me 1 minute to assess." She circled the compound at altitude, taking fire but ignoring it, her mind working through the problem like a chess puzzle. There was no solution, no good solution. But there was a bad solution, the kind that would either work brilliantly or kill them all. She keyed her mic. "Reeves, I'm going to put the helicopter in the compound courtyard. It's going to be tight. I'll have about 90 seconds before the rotor wash brings down enough dust and debris to make it impossible to see. You need to have your team moving the instant I touch down." There was a pause, and she could imagine him looking at the courtyard, at its impossibly small dimensions, at the walls and power lines that surrounded it. "Reaper, that's suicide. The space is too small. You'll never fit." "I'll fit. Just be ready." She didn't wait for his response. The Black Hawk dropped from the sky like a stone, and she flared hard at the last moment, killing their airspeed and dropping them into the courtyard with a precision that came from somewhere beyond training. The rotor tips cleared the walls by less than a foot on each side. Dixon was making small, whimpering sounds beside her. She blocked him out. Blocked out everything except the controls and the aircraft and the impossible geometry she was making possible through sheer will. The wheels touched down. 90 seconds starts now, she said into the radio. The SEALs poured out of buildings, carrying their wounded, moving with disciplined speed despite the chaos. Enemy fire was coming from everywhere, rounds sparking off the helicopter's armored skin. One hit the windscreen directly in front of her face, starring the glass but not penetrating. She didn't flinch. 60 seconds. The last of the team was loading. She could see Reeves doing a head count, making sure everyone was aboard. The dust was rising now, her rotor wash kicking up a storm that would blind them in seconds. 45 seconds. Last man, Reeves shouted. She was pulling pitch before he finished, the Black Hawk straining to climb out of a hole it barely fit into. The aircraft rose inch by inch, rotors screaming, turbines at maximum output. The walls seemed to reach for them like hands. A power line caught on the landing gear and snapped with a flash of sparks. They cleared the compound by 3 feet, and suddenly they were in open sky, bullets chasing them but falling behind as she poured on speed. In the back she could hear shouting, the controlled chaos of treating casualties, but they were airborne, they were alive. Against all odds and any reasonable expectation, they were flying home. Dixon was staring at her with something approaching awe. How did you know that would work? I didn't, she admitted. But the alternative was leaving them there, so it had to work. The flight back to Bagram was tense. 3 wounded this time, none critical but all needing attention. She kept the helicopter steady while in the back Dixon and a SEAL medic worked on their teammates. When they landed and the casualties were offloaded, Reeves came to the cockpit. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there looking at her. Finally, you saved our lives, all of us. That was the craziest, most skilled flying I've ever seen. She was exhausted, running on adrenaline and coffee and the grim satisfaction of another successful mission. Just doing my job, Lieutenant Commander. But he shook his head. No, that was way beyond the job. That was, he searched for words. That was Reaper. That was why you carry that name. Because you go where death lives and you bring people back. Something in his words hit her harder than she expected. For 3 years she carried the call sign like a burden, a reminder of Koringal and all the people she couldn't save. But maybe it was also a promise, a statement of intent. I am Reaper and I decide. Not death me. Thanks, she said quietly. The remaining days of the deployment passed in a blur of missions. Word had spread through the special operations community about the female pilot who flew like she had a death wish but kept bringing everyone home. Other teams started requesting her. She flew for Delta operators, for Rangers, for Marine Special Operations. Each mission added to her legend. Each impossible approach and miraculous extraction built her reputation. By the time her deployment ended, she'd logged more combat hours than most pilots accumulated in an entire career. She'd been shot down once, really shot down, not just damaged, and had auto-rotated the helicopter to a hard but survivable landing, then helped defend the crash site until rescue arrived. She'd been recommended for the Distinguished Flying Cross. On her last day in country, Reeves and his team came to see her off. They'd had a unit coin made for her, custom work with her call sign on one side and a simple inscription on the other. She decides who flies and who falls. It was the greatest honor she'd ever received. You're going back to Fort Campbell, Reeves asked. Yeah, and probably Germany after that. Army's moving me to a unit that does medical evacuation primarily. They think my skill set is wasted doing insertions. She smiled. They don't understand that it's all the same mission. Get there fast, bring them home alive. Hammer, standing with the others, spoke up. You're coming back though, right? Next deployment. She looked at them, these warriors who'd learned to trust her with their lives, who'd gone from skepticism to respect to something like family. If they send me back and you're here, I'll fly for you. That's a promise. They shook hands, exchanged contact information, took photos. The kind of goodbye that happens when people who have faced death together have to return to normal life. When her helicopter lifted off, heading for the first leg of her journey home, she looked down at Bagram one last time. At the mountains beyond. At the valleys where she'd earned every letter of her call sign. At the place where she'd proven, over and over, that she belonged. Back in the States, she tried to return to normal life. She flew training missions. She did evaluations. She taught younger pilots the subtleties of combat flying. But something had changed. She'd tasted what it meant to fly at the edge, to make a difference with every mission, and everything else felt hollow by comparison. Her reputation had followed her home. At Fort Campbell, other pilots treated her with a respect that was new and strange. The call sign that had once been whispered with doubt was now spoken with admiration. Reaper, the pilot who went into hell and brought souls back. 6 months later, she was at a bar off post when her phone rang. Unknown number, but something made her answer. Captain Cahill, this is Commander Reeves. Got a minute? They talked for an hour. He told her about his new assignment, about a joint special operations unit being formed that would work across all service branches. They were looking for dedicated aviation assets. They wanted the best. They wanted her. It's volunteer only, he said, and it's going to be dangerous. More dangerous than anything we did in Afghanistan. But if you're interested, she didn't hesitate. When do I start? That had been 4 years ago. Now she was a major, assigned to a unit that didn't officially exist, flying missions that would never be publicly acknowledged. She'd been shot at over 4 continents, had crashed twice more and walked away both times, had saved dozens of operators and killed insurgents when necessary, had proven beyond any doubt that she was as good as any pilot in any service, better than most. The call sign had evolved too. To the new generation of special operators, Reaper wasn't just a name. It was a promise. If you were wounded, if you were trapped, if you were dying in some God-forsaken corner of the world, Reaper would come for you. She would fly through fire and death itself to bring you home, and she always carried the medic bag. Always. Because she was both things now, pilot and healer, warrior and savior. She was the person who flew into the darkness and brought back the light. On a cold Tuesday morning in November, 5 years after that first mission with Reeves, she stood in front of a room full of young pilots at the Army's Aviation Center. She'd been asked to give a talk about combat flying, about what it took to survive and excel in the hardest mission set the military offered. They looked at her with varying expressions, some awestruck, some skeptical, some simply curious. She saw herself in their faces years ago trying to prove she belonged. They're going to underestimate you, she told them, not bothering with pleasantries or introduction. Some of you anyway. They'll see your gender, your size, your background, whatever makes you different from what they expect a combat pilot to be. And they'll doubt. She paused, looking at each of them. Good, let them doubt, because when the bullets start flying and the situation goes sideways and everyone else is saying it's impossible, that's when you get to show them who you really are. That's when you prove that you're not just capable, you're essential. She told them about Korangal, about learning to be a medic because someone had to make the impossible choices, about becoming a pilot because she wanted to be the miracle that arrived when hope was running out, about earning a call sign that terrified her and defined her in equal measure. Some of you will get call signs that make you laugh, she said. Some will get ones that embarrass you. And some of you, if you're lucky or unlucky depending on your perspective, will get ones that change your life, that become your identity. When that happens, you have a choice. You can run from it or you can own it. You can let it define you or you can define it. She touched the medic bag slung over her shoulder, a gesture that had become habitual. I was Reaper before I could fly. I was Reaper when I was just a medic trying to keep Marines alive in a valley where everyone was trying to kill us. The name found me because of what I was willing to do, because I stood between wounded soldiers and death and refused to let death win. Her voice was quiet now, but every person in the room was leaning forward. And when I learned to fly, I brought the name with me. I brought the mission with me. Save lives, bring people home, do the impossible because the alternative is unacceptable. That's what Reaper means. Not death, not killing, but the refusal to let death have the final word. She could see some of them were getting emotional. Good. They needed to understand what this job really meant. You're going to face moments where you have to choose, she continued, between the safe option and the right option, between following the rules and following your conscience, between leaving people behind and risking everything to bring them home. Those moments will define your career. They'll define your call sign. They'll define who you are as a pilot and as a person. She looked at the young women in particular, knowing what they would face. And for some of you, you'll face an extra burden. You'll have to prove yourself twice as hard for half the credit. You'll have people doubt you before you even start the engines. You'll hear the jokes and the comments and the whispers that you only got here because of quotas or politics or anything except your own skill and dedication. Her jaw set. Prove them wrong. Every single time. Fly better. Work harder. Be so undeniably competent that they choke on their doubts. And then, when you've earned their respect, be gracious. Because you're not doing this for revenge. You're doing it because people's lives depend on you being excellent. The briefing ended with applause, but several pilots stayed behind to ask questions. One of them, a young lieutenant with nervous energy, approached hesitantly. "Major Cahill, can I ask you something personal?" Vesper nodded. "Did you ever think about quitting when it got too hard, when people doubted you too much?" She considered the question seriously. "Every deployment, multiple times. There were moments when I thought I couldn't do it anymore, when the weight of the responsibility was too much. When I'd lost someone despite my best efforts and I questioned everything." She met the lieutenant's eyes. "But then I'd remember why I started. Remember the Marines in Koringal who lived because I refused to give up. Remember the SEALs I pulled out of that compound. Remember every single person who's alive because I was there, flying that helicopter, making that impossible approach. And I'd realized that quitting wasn't an option. Because if I quit, who flies those missions? Who brings those people home?" The lieutenant nodded slowly, processing this. "How do you deal with the fear?" "You don't," Vesper said simply. "You fly with it. You let it make you cautious without making you paralyzed. You use it to stay sharp. Fear isn't the enemy. Complacency is. Overconfidence is. Fear keeps you alive if you respect it but don't let it control you." That night back in her quarters, she received an email. It was from a name she didn't recognize, a Marine Lance Corporal named Thompson. The subject line read, "Thank you from Koringal." She opened it with a mixture of curiosity and trepidation. The email was short. "Major Cahill, you probably don't remember me. I was one of the Marines you saved during the Koringal Valley ambush 5 years ago. I was 19, it was my first deployment, and I took shrapnel to the chest and leg. You worked on me for 3 hours while the firefight continued around us. You told me I was too young and too stupid to die. I survived, recovered, got married last year. My wife is pregnant with our first child. I'm writing because I wanted you to know that every good thing in my life exists because you refused to let me die that night. Because you were there, because you had the skills and the courage and the stubborn determination to keep me alive when I should have bled out. Thank you doesn't cover it. But thank you, you gave me a life. I hope you know how many of us there are, people walking around, living our lives who only exist because of you. You're our guardian angel. You're our reaper." She read it 3 times, and by the 3rd time there were tears on her face. This was why. This was always why. Not the medals or the recognition or the respect, but this. The knowledge that somewhere out there, people were living and loving and building futures because she'd been in the right place at the right time with the right skills. The next morning, she was back in the cockpit, flying a training mission with a new co-pilot. The young warrant officer was competent but green, nervous about making mistakes. Halfway through the flight, Vesper let him take the controls for a simulated emergency procedure. He froze, panicked, started to overcorrect. She could have taken the controls back, completed the maneuver herself, maintained the illusion that she was always in control and always perfect. Instead, she talked him through it. Calm voice, clear instructions, patience. The same patience someone had shown her once when she was the green pilot making mistakes. He completed the procedure clumsily but successfully. When they landed, he was embarrassed, apologizing for his performance. "Sir, I'm sorry, I should have done better, I should have," she cut him off. "You did fine, you're learning, that's what training is for." She paused. "You know what the most important skill is in this cockpit?" He shook his head. "It's not stick and rudder, it's not memorizing procedures. It's the ability to keep functioning when everything goes wrong. When you're scared and confused and you don't know what to do, that's when pilots are made. And you just proved you can do it." His expression shifted from embarrassed to something like pride. She recognized that look, had seen it in mirrors after her own early successes. The enemy isn't the helicopter or the weather or the mission, she continued. The enemy is panic. The enemy is giving up. If you can keep your head and keep trying, you can handle anything this job throws at you. Remember that. Over the following months, she continued to mentor younger pilots while flying increasingly complex missions with her Special Operations Unit. She was recommended for promotion to lieutenant colonel, though she turned it down. She didn't want a desk job, didn't want to be removed from the cockpit. Flying wasn't what she did. It was who she was. On a cold night in February, she got a call that made her blood freeze. Reeves' team was in trouble in Syria. A mission had gone catastrophically wrong, and they were trapped in a building surrounded by hostile forces. Multiple casualties. No clear extraction route. The assigned aviation asset had been shot down attempting the rescue. They needed someone willing to try the impossible. They needed Reaper. She was wheels up within 20 minutes, flying through the night toward a situation that every rational part of her mind said was unsurvivable. But rational had never been her strong suit. Not when people needed her. Not when Reeves was calling. Not when her call sign wasn't just a name but a promise she'd made to herself and to everyone who'd ever trusted her. The mission briefing was grim. Enemy forces had the building completely surrounded. AAA weapons on nearby rooftops. No viable landing zones. The previous helicopter had been hit by an RPG and had crashed 3 kilometers away. The crew had survived, but the message was clear. This was a death trap. She flew towards Syria with her mind in that cold, calm place where fear couldn't reach her. Dixon was her co-pilot again, by chance or fate, and he was quiet beside her. They'd flown together for 5 years now. He knew better than to question her when she got like this. The building appeared on their thermal imaging at 300 hours. She circled once, high enough to avoid most of the ground fire, low enough to assess the situation. Reeves' voice crackled through her headset. "Reaper, that you up there? It's me. How many wounded? 4 critical, 2 urgent. We won't last until sunrise." She processed this. 4 critical meant they'd die without immediate surgical intervention. 2 urgent meant they'd die in hours without treatment. The rest of the team was probably wounded too, just not badly enough to report. "I'm coming in," she said. "Reaper, they shot down the last bird. They've got RPGs and I know what they have. Prep your people. I'll be on the ground in 3 minutes." She switched to the frequency for air support. "Reaper to any station, I need immediate suppression of enemy positions, coordinates to follow." A new voice answered, an AC-130 gunship orbiting at altitude. "Reaper, Hammer 4-1, we've got you. Send your coordinates and we'll prep the area." She rattled off grid coordinates for the rooftop positions she'd identified, then added, "I need you to start your gun run exactly 30 seconds before I begin my approach. I'll time it off your tracers." "Copy, Reaper. You're either the bravest pilot I've ever heard or the craziest." "Probably both," she said, and meant it. She took the Black Hawk down in a screaming dive that had Dixon grabbing his harness. The AC-130's guns lit up the night, tracers arcing down like judgment from heaven, tearing apart the rooftop positions. She timed her approach perfectly, arriving at the building as the gunship's fire swept across the surrounding area. The enemy was suppressed, confused, trying to find cover. It would last maybe 45 seconds before they rallied. That was all the time she had. She put the helicopter's wheels on the building's rooftop, an impossibly small space barely large enough for the aircraft. "Loading now," Reeves' voice, urgent but controlled. She kept the rotors at full power, ready to lift off instantly. Could feel impacts on the fuselage as enemy fire found them. An alarm started screaming engine damage. She ignored it. 30 seconds, 45, the world's longest minute. Last man aboard. The Black Hawk staggered into the air, overloaded, damaged, barely flying. But flying. She turned toward friendly territory, nursing the wounded aircraft through the night sky. Behind her, she could hear the chaos of treating casualties, could hear someone screaming, could hear the clipped, professional voices of people doing battlefield medicine under impossible conditions. One of the engines was running rough, temperature climbing. They weren't going to make it back to base. Not with this much damage. She made calculations in her head, overlaying her mental map of the region with her knowledge of the aircraft's capabilities. There was a forward operating base, barely more than a dirt strip, about 40 kilometers away. If she could keep the helicopter in the air that long, they might make it. Dixon, I need you to run the emergency engine failure checklist. We're going to lose number 2 soon. His hands were already moving, voice steady as he went through the procedures. They'd done this before, practiced it 100 times. Never thought they'd actually have to do it in combat, overloaded with wounded in the back. The engine failed at 35 kilometers. She compensated, pushing the remaining engine beyond its limits, making the aircraft do things it wasn't designed to do. The fob appeared in her night vision like salvation. She didn't bother with a proper approach, just got the helicopter on the ground before it decided to stop flying entirely. When the rotors finally stopped, the silence was deafening. Medical personnel were already running toward them, ready for the casualties. She sat in the cockpit, hands still on the controls, unable to move. Dixon was looking at her with an expression she couldn't read. "Reaper," he finally said. "That was." He trailed off, unable to find words. "I don't know how you did that." "Neither do I," she admitted. In the back, Reeves appeared, covered in blood that probably wasn't all his own. He climbed into the cockpit, sat down in the space between the seats, and just looked at her. "Third time you've saved my life," he said quietly. "I've stopped counting," she replied. "You know they're going to ground you for this, violating about 15 different safety protocols, flying a damaged aircraft, overloading. Taking unnecessary risks," she nodded. "Probably. Was it worth it?" She looked past him at the medics working on the casualties, at the SEALs who were alive despite impossible odds, at the helicopter that had held together long enough to get them home despite having every reason to fall apart. "Yeah," she said. "It was worth it." They grounded her for 3 weeks while investigating the incident. There were questions, reviews, formal inquiries. Some people argued she'd been reckless. Others said she'd been heroic. The debate raged in conference rooms and email chains while she sat in her quarters, waiting for judgment. The Distinguished Flying Cross she'd been recommended for after Afghanistan was upgraded to the Silver Star. Her first. The citation read, in part, "For gallantry in action against an armed enemy." Captain Cahill repeatedly exposed herself and her aircraft to enemy fire in order to rescue surrounded friendly forces. Her skilled flying and courageous actions saved the lives of 12 Special Operations personnel and demonstrated the finest traditions of military service. But more important than the medal was the message Reeves sent her. All 12 are going to make it, even the critical ones. The surgeons said another hour and they would have lost at least 3. You gave us that hour. You gave them their lives. Thank you doesn't cover it, but thank you. She was cleared to fly again with a formal reprimand in her file and an unofficial acknowledgement that she'd done exactly what needed to be done. The reprimand was for the record. The acknowledgement was the truth. Word of the Syria mission spread through the Special Operations community like wildfire. Reaper had done it again, had flown into impossible situations and brought everyone home, had earned her call sign one more time. Young pilots started requesting assignment to her unit, wanting to learn from her. Female pilots in particular saw her as proof that they could do anything their male counterparts could do. Better, even. She became a symbol without meaning to, an example of what was possible when skill and determination and sheer stubborn refusal to quit combined. She didn't particularly want to be a symbol. She just wanted to fly. But she understood the responsibility that came with the reputation. So she mentored when asked, taught when needed, showed the next generation that excellence wasn't about gender or background or any other arbitrary category. It was about being willing to do the hard things, the impossible things, the things that had to be done. On a spring morning 2 years later, she stood in front of another room full of young pilots. The Army had asked her to speak again, this time to a class graduating from flight school. She saw the same expressions she'd seen before: hope, nervousness, determination. "You're about to join the best aviation community in the world," she told them. "You're going to fly helicopters that can do incredible things, but the helicopter doesn't make you great. You make the helicopter great. Your skills, your decisions, your willingness to push beyond what's comfortable, that's what matters. She told them about Koringal again. About that night when she was just a medic with no helicopter and no escape, when she'd had to decide who got treatment and who didn't, who lived and who died. About how that experience had shaped everything that came after. The call sign Reaper, she said, started as a burden, a reminder of the weight of those decisions, but it became something else. It became a promise, a statement of intent. I am Reaper and I decide, not the enemy, not the odds, not the people who say it can't be done. Me, I decide who makes it home. She paused, looking at each of them. You're going to get call signs, some funny, some embarrassing, some meaningful. Whatever name you get, own it, make it mean something. Let it remind you why you're here and what you're capable of. Because on your worst day, when everything is going wrong and people are depending on you and you don't think you can do it, that's when your call sign becomes real. That's when you prove who you are. After the speech, a young pilot approached her. Female, nervous, clearly wanting to ask something but unsure how to phrase it. Go ahead, Vesper said gently. I've heard every question there is. How do you deal with the pressure of being the first? Of being the one everyone's watching, waiting for you to fail? Vesper recognized the fear in the question, had felt it herself many times. You stop thinking about being first, she said. You start thinking about being good, about being excellent, about doing the mission so well that your gender becomes irrelevant. People will watch, people will judge. Let them. Your job is to fly and to bring people home. Everything else is noise. The pilot nodded, absorbing this. Thank you, Major, for showing us it's possible. It's not just possible, Vesper corrected. It's reality. You belong here just as much as anyone. Don't let anyone, including yourself, convince you otherwise. That afternoon, she flew a routine training mission with a new unit preparing for deployment. Nothing special, just practice insertions and extractions. But halfway through, her mind drifted back to that first mission with Reeves. To the skeptical glances and the casual dismissal. To the moment she dropped from the sky into an impossible landing zone and changed everything. She'd come a long way since then, had proven herself 1,000 times over, had earned the respect of the hardest, most elite fighting forces in the world. But in some ways, she was still that combat medic in Koringal, still making the impossible choice, still refusing to let death win. She just traded a medic bag for a helicopter. The mission was the same: save lives, bring people home, do the impossible because the alternative was unacceptable. That night she sat in her quarters and updated her will. It was a ritual she'd developed over the years, an acknowledgement of mortality that paradoxically made her feel more alive. She added a new section. If I don't make it back from a mission, I want my medic bag buried with me. Not the new one, the original one from Koringal. The one with the blood stains that never quite washed out, because that's where it started. That's where I became Reaper. Years passed. She flew more missions than she could count. Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan again, Niger, Yemen, places whose names would never be public. Each mission added to her legend. Each impossible extraction became another story whispered among operators. Reaper would come for you. No matter where you were, no matter how bad the situation, if you called, she would come. She made lieutenant colonel eventually, couldn't refuse it forever, but negotiated to stay in a flying billet. Turned down colonel twice. She didn't want command. She wanted the cockpit. At 43, she was one of the oldest active combat pilots in the Army. People started suggesting retirement, desk jobs, training billets. She ignored them all. Until the morning she couldn't ignore her body anymore. The pain in her back had been building for months, ignored and dismissed as part of getting older. But when she couldn't turn her head to check her 6 o'clock without agony, she finally went to the doctor. 3 herniated discs. Degenerative damage from years of sitting in a cockpit, from helicopter crashes, from carrying wounded men through firefights. The flight surgeon was blunt. Major, you need to be grounded. This isn't sustainable. You're risking permanent nerve damage. She sat in the clinic, staring